Hey everyone, welcome to Be the Change. My name is Lily Mott, and today's episode is about how change comes when we understand that we are not superhumans. I am so excited to share this conversation with you today because this guest story is incredible. Shomy Hasan Chowdhury is a water, sanitation, and hygiene activist and a co-founder of Awareness 360, which is a nonprofit dedicated to empowering young people from across over 70 countries in advancing the UN global goals. So, with that brief introduction, let's get started with this episode featuring Shomy Hasan Chowdhury.
Thank you so much for having me on this podcast. My name is Shomy. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I'm originally from Bangladesh. I'm currently based in London in the UK. I'm a WASH activist, a water sanitation and hygiene activist, and the co-founder of a global nonprofit called Awareness 360.
That was a great intro. So can you tell me a little bit about what got you started with this work? What inspired you to become a WASH activist? Tell me more about that.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So I have been involved in the social impact space since I was 13. So I used to do different volunteer work in my local community. And then when I was 16, I went to the US as an exchange student to complete my senior year of high school in Michigan. That's when I think my extent of community service work got quite expanded, where I used to spend a majority of my time just working for different projects, community service activities, and so on. So I think that's where my passion for community service was grown. And then once I came back home after my exchange year, I continued doing the same work. But I didn't have any particular cause or focus area at the time. So WASH was not my thing at the time. And then if you allow me to be vulnerable a bit. Unfortunately, in 2014, my mother passed away from diarrhea, and it was a shock. And she died just within the matter of a day. And of course, it's the most tragic thing that happened to me and my family. And while we were just grappling through this whole thing and just understanding how did it even happen, is this even possible, I was exposed to the whole world of water sanitation and hygiene, and how there are so many people around the world who are suffering from or dying from diseases that are linked to access to WASH. So that's really how I got involved in the WASH space. And I thought that, it was obviously too late to save my mom, but if I can do something about the cause, maybe I can help advance this issue of, getting more people access to WASH. So I think that's how I got kind of in an unplanned way, I got in the world of WASH.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And I do think it's amazing that you managed to take that horrible moment in your life and just that part of your story and turn it into something that is so positive. And I know that you have been able to reach so many people and do so much great work. Can you tell me a little bit about Awareness 360 and what you're doing with the organization? I would love to know a little bit about that.
Yeah, absolutely. This is my favorite part of any interview. I love talking about Awareness
I'm glad.
360.
I'm glad.
So after my mom's incident, after a few months of doing random wash work, I met my now best friend. His name is Rijvi. We met in college, and I realized that both of us have different passion on different causes, but similar passion in a way. And when we were talking about just randomly discussing as two friends discussing about what we do in our non-academic life, I shared my story of how I'm so passionate about WASH and why and everything, and he was sharing about his part of the story. And then it suddenly clicked for both of us that there must be other young people just like him and I, where people want to do something for their community, but maybe, for both of us, we have had previous experience. For example, when I was in the US, I did so many different kind of volunteer work, and I picked up different skills from here and there. But we identified a need of a platform where young people who are at the beginner stage of their change making journey, or who are just interested in social action work, that they want a little bit of push or guidance. And if they receive that, they would be able to change and become civil society leaders themselves. So that's when out of that random conversation, we decided to do something together, to build something together. So from that conversation, Awareness 360's idea was evolved. And then over the years, it's been 10 years. So last year was our 10th anniversary. And now we are a full-fledged nonprofit organization. We are currently working with young people in over 70 countries. And there are two main things that we focus on right now. One is obviously our wash work, which was kind of the beginning of everything, right? Where we identify different vulnerable groups and communities. For example, we have worked with different sex workers community, different like sanitation workers, different school children, refugees, and so on, people with disabilities, and different other vulnerable and marginalized groups. And then we conduct different like in-depth surveys and interviews and all that to understand where they're at in terms of their level of access and understanding of WASH. So it can be about a hand washing campaign. It can be access to clean water, where we fundraise and give them water supply, or we fundraise to build them toilets. So it really depends on what the need of that community is. But we do a lot of like software work, less than hardware, where we actually focus on inducing behavioral change. So in the long run, so that they actually understand the importance of WASH and the kind of it might sound a bit basic, but with the kind of communities that we work with, because of the lack of awareness, the lack of education, and lack of just an overall understanding of the long-term value and return of investment in WASH, they often don't understand, and sometimes they simply don't have the privilege of investing in WASH, right? So that's where we come in to provide them with access to WASH. It could be organizing a training to train menstruators on how to make their own sustainable cloth pads, reusable cloth pads, for example, or hand washing campaign in schools and things like that. So it's really very vast, and it depends on the community that we're working with. So that's our WASH work. The other big pillar of our work is youth development, where we run an annual fellowship program where we onboard young people from around the world. So it's about 400 to 500 young people every cohort. So last year we had about 472 young people, I think, from over 70 countries, from like all 6 continents. So it's a very diverse cohort, and not just from like cities or like urban spaces, but also like very remote, even within the countries as well. We have been able to reach young people, and then they go through like a robust training process. So the first 4 months is a youth development program. We call it YDP in short, where they learn from world-class speakers and experts on different topics related to social action. So it could be what are the sustainable development goals, and not just the surface level SDG talks, but really like how can they actually get involved in championing these global goals in their own communities, in their own local context. Public speaking, communications, leadership in crisis. How do you manage a project? How do you build a team? How do you find a co-founder? Like there are different kind of topics really. And then the good part, or the interesting part of this fellowship, is where after the training, they actually conduct a project themselves. So they choose an SDG of their liking or a cause that they feel passionate about. They identify a problem in their community, then they come up with their solution. So a lot of our past graduates have continued to build their own nonprofit out of that one little project that they did as part of the fellowship, which we're very proud to be a part of in some way. So that's our basically youth empowerment work, where we're training young people, giving them the mentorship, the resources, the skills that they can actually implement in their own communities and become leaders themselves.
There's so much to unpack there. There's so much work that you've done. I think the first thing that came to mind when you were talking is I think just the scope of the work that you've done. I think all of these different young people coming together and doing this work, I think it's amazing. Can you tell me about some of the challenges that you've faced over the last 10 years trying to develop Awareness 360? I think my head's spinning with questions about how you're able to do this, but what have been some of those challenges that you faced throughout the development of the organization?
Yeah, I mean, challenges have been many, and I mean, we still face challenges to this day. So I think the first challenge in terms of our WASH work is the fact that the result on the communities that we work with. That's number one, like the sensitivity of the issue or the topics that we work on. So some of the communities, they simply don't understand the need for what we are offering. Like a campaign, they're not as interested to join because they would rather focus on other things, right? And sometimes some of the work that we do are also redundant in a way, because if we are telling a certain person to invest in water and soap, but they're in extreme poverty, and they have to choose between buying a bar of soap versus their next meal, right? So obviously they will choose food over hygiene. So sometimes it becomes extremely difficult for us to even penetrate those environments to actually tell them that this is why we should, in the long run, it will help with your productivity, you will become less sick. And the result is also, it comes when we first started the work, we used to see impact in a different way. We would measure our impact in terms of numbers only. So we would think, okay, we organized a hand washing campaign. We had 100 students who joined the campaign. So 100 is our impact. But now we see impact in a totally different way, where 100 is not really our real impact. I mean, of course, that's attendance, but how many people actually wash their hands following the steps that they learned in their daily life after they're done with the workshop? And what does that actually result in, right? Like, are they missing schools less? Are they actually, going to work more? Like, what is the actual outcome? That is the ultimate real impact. Now, that doesn't come in the matter of a day or a month or a year. That takes years. And so convincing the beneficiaries themselves, plus convincing the donors and our other partners who we work with, it is a challenge, because it's such a long process so sometimes, you even us as a team, like, it is easy to become frustrated when you don't see immediate results. So I think just navigating that challenge of, we are working with a problem that the result is not going to be immediate, just growing into that mindset has been a bit of a challenge. So which is why we tend to work with the communities on a long term basis instead of focusing on one off workshops. So for example, during COVID, we did like the relief distribution thing. We were providing with food and hygiene stuff to a group of sex workers in a brothel, and we have been working with them since 2017, or earlier even. So when we went there again during the pandemic, they were telling us that, oh, remember you were teaching us hand washing back in 2017? Now they're showing us that on the TV. So I think we try to build like a trusting relationship with these communities, so that they actually see that we're not there just for the sake of doing a project, taking some photos and writing some numbers in a report, but we are really there to see through the ultimate change that results from it. So that's one challenge, like the long term nature of the thing and the sensitivity of the issues. For example, we in Bangladesh, for example, menstruation is still a taboo topic. So when we are there to talk about menstruation and menstrual hygiene and so on, sometimes it's difficult to get that enthusiastic participation from the menstruators themselves. Sometimes our one of our target is also during those campaigns to include non-menstruators, or generally men, more. But then they're either shy, or there's a stigma around it, that we don't want to count impact as, okay, 20 women joined us, but then also, how do we actually break that stigma, right? So sometimes we are faced with that kind of barriers or challenges from the communities themselves, which can be frustrating, because we feel like we know the result, it will be good, but then it's hard to convince them. So that's one. And then the other challenge with working with young people is that a majority of them are volunteers, right? And I think it is difficult to lead a group of employees, paid employees, but it is much more difficult to lead a group of unpaid volunteers. There's burnout issue. There's the issue of balancing between, am I exploiting them too much? How do I make sure that they're actually really engaged? They're still passionate about the work. So it's a bit difficult, especially during the pandemic. For example, it was we had to stop majority of our in-person projects and just changing the whole thing to online. So it was very difficult to like just deal with these kind of unexpected challenges. And the last challenge I'd like to point out is fundraising. Nonprofit is such an unsustainable system in itself, which is something that I didn't realize when I founded it back in 2014. But now, after all these years, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is actually so much difficult and unsustainable. So you're always looking for money. And small scale grassroots organizations like ours don't usually get that attention from the fundraising space, or those opportunities or grants. And it's a full time job in itself, just asking for money and pleasing the donors all the time. Sometimes it may even mean that you might have to deviate from from your main agenda just to please the donors, which is something we didn't want to do. So sometimes we had to let many opportunities go simply because we didn't want to bend into the system. So just dealing with all these things can be very, very difficult while maintaining and growing a nonprofit.
All of those things I can envision being very challenging. And I think the fundraising part as well, just the constant persistence, I think in the nonprofits that I've worked for and around, I think that's just such a difficult part. But thank you
Yeah.
so much for pointing those out. I think that that was just so real and I appreciate that. I have one more question for you. Lots of young people want to create change and make a difference, but they might not know how to get started with that work. And with all of your work with Awareness 360, I feel like you're a great person to answer this. What advice would you want to share with those young people who might be listening?
Yeah, I think the first advice would be to truly like reflect, be self-aware, and understand what is the cause or the issue that you're genuinely passionate about, because this is going to be a challenging ride, right? And if they're not really passionate about the cause, then there's a greater chance that they will just give up at one point. So to be persistent, we need to be spending our time and energy on something that we're genuinely passionate about. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to have a tragic story to be passionate about something, right? There's just so much going around us that it is very easy to pick something that you just simply don't like, or you want it to change or something, right? So there are so many systemic issues even. So I think it's important that you pick one thing or something. And then I think we also, as young people, we are energetic, we are passionate in general about making the world a better place. But then we also need to understand that we are not superhumans. It is actually not possible to change the entire world in a day. And just accepting the fact that majority of the work that we're doing as activists, as change makers, we will probably not see the ultimate result in our own lifetime. And this is not something like, for example, if you're passionate about women empowerment, gender equality, I might sound a bit hopeless, but I don't think we will see the ultimate gender equality in the world in our lifetime. But then again, this is not the what we are experiencing now is much better than what it was 100 years ago, right? And it was because the people who were before us, the activists before us, our previous generations, they have done the groundwork, which is why we are reaping those benefits. Similarly, we need to advance, keep up with this momentum, so that the future generations can get the benefit from it. And so we're making things better for us and the next generation, but most likely we will not see the outcome. So we also need to be realistic about our expectations about the cause that we are championing. And the last thing I think I want to share is how do we measure success? Or how do we define success? I think there are many like wrong parameters these days. So for example, oh, how many awards have you gotten? What is your title, etc., etc. You don't need to be a CEO or a co-founder to be considered as a successful change maker, right? We don't necessarily have to start something from scratch. So I think doing a community mapping, understanding what are the existing initiatives, resources, organizations who are already doing the work, championing the cause that you feel passionate about, and join the forces. But if you have something innovative, sure. But I think duplication of efforts is a big problem, and we have limited resources. So we don't necessarily have to come up with something brand new. So if a young person wants to start their change making journey, I'd say that research what is already existing and maybe join forces with them. But then also like just not being shy about starting. If someone wants to start something, then you will fail, and that's just part of the process. But get started instead of thinking, oh, what will happen, it's not big enough, it's not good enough. Awareness 360 is still learning and growing. I mean, I know 15 years from now, I will probably say I made so many mistakes in 2024, right? So it's just part of the process. So just getting started instead of feeling shy, I think would be another one.
I was so inspired by this conversation with Shomi, and I think she shared so much great advice at the end of our conversation. I think the advice that stood out to me the most was about how we need to understand that we aren't superhuman, and we won't be able to change the world in one day, or maybe even our lifetime. A lot of issues that I'm passionate about, and I'm sure the issues that you out there listening to this episode are passionate about, won't be solved in my lifetime, let alone in one day or 1 week. So, the next time you're being hard on yourself for not doing enough, keep Shomi's advice in mind. Change comes when we understand that we are not superhumans. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and you can find Shomy on Instagram and LinkedIn, and I included those links in the description of this episode. If you want to talk about anything I mentioned, please reach out to me by email at lily@bethechangepodcast.org or on Instagram at Be the Change Media Network. I am working on expanding Be the Change Media Network, which means bringing you more inspiring stories from amazing guests. If you enjoyed this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could leave the podcast a rating and a comment, because it will help these stories to reach, educate, and inspire more people. And I would also love to hear your thoughts and feedback. Tune in for my next episode, but until then, be the change you wish to see in the world. Bye, guys.